Hey, what's up? I'm gonna do another video. This one's also gonna be about theonomy and how I think theonomy is biblical. And the last video I made, I was talking about theonomy, and I got some comments that they don't think that there's the idea that the government comes out of man's sin, like the authority of man over man, something sinful in his nature, and that if Christ was truly in charge, then we wouldn't have needs for kings and governments, things like that. Um, and I'm going to try to show you that that's not a very good idea. If you try embracing that, you're going to have some crazy roads. All right, I'm gonna read a verse. There's a bunch of verses in the Bible that talk about God as king and like Christ as king of nations. But I'm just going to read one that's in Jeremiah 10:7. Who would not fear thee, O King of nations? For to thee appertaineth the dominion. For among all the wise men of the Gentiles, and in all their kingdoms, there is none like thee. All right, so like God has dominion. There's nothing in creation. God says that after all the creation, after every day, that what he made was good. And at the end of the creation, he said that he saw creation and everything that he made was very good. He granted dominion to man. He said, let us make man in our image and let him have dominion over all the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, and the beasts of the land, right? The maximum of creation was man, made in God's image, who had dominion over the earth, right? So there's nothing instinctively evil about dominion. There's nothing instinctively bad about the idea of government or dominion, right? And God is called the King of Nations. And in Matthew 28:18-19, Christ claims authority, all authority under heaven and earth. So he is like king. One of his offices is king. He's king, prophet, and priest. So I don't think there's anything instinctively sinful about the idea of dominion or kingship. All right. And if you start separating these kind of things, then you get into an idea. It's a philosophy, Greek philosophy. It's called dualism. And dualism was the idea that there was like two natures to the universe, a nature of like light and good and a nature of darkness or evil, right? And these two things are at war with each other. The Greeks didn't have a real idea of like morality, like one thing was more moral than another. They were all about like power. And so like for the power of the light, you had the power of the darkness. And those two things canceled each other out, made the world in balance, right? The universe is in balance. So the Greeks thought duality like, kept the world united, like the light and the dark. And then the Gnostics kind of took the same idea of the Greeks and mixed it with Christianity. And they came up with the idea that the Gnostics believed that there was like the one real God, and they called him the monad. And then they said that there was like a lesser God. Okay, it was the demiurge, and the demiurge was the God that was the God of creation, the God that created the world and the universe. They called the demiurge. The demiurge was basically evil, and that he trapped the a spark of light that came from the monad inside man, and that the body was dark and sinfulness, but it trapped inside it the soul, which was a spark from the monad. And then they held that like Jesus came down to free the spark of the monad from the evil body that the demiurge had created. And they embraced like the dualism, the war of the dark against the light, and that Jesus came not in a physical body, but as a spirit, because bodies are instinctively evil or innately evil. And then after the Gnostics, they rose up a big giant cult called the Manichaees, which was famous because Augustine of Hippo joined the Manichaees for a while. And this cult was started by a guy named Mani, who was from Iran, ancient Iran, and he tried to make his own religion, which he combined Buddhism, Christianity, and the writings of Plato. And he held that there was a dualism, there was a light and a dark in the world, and that the light within the soul was trapped by the body, which was innately evil, right? And that there was like much a crazy religion, but he held that everything was a battle between light and dark. The body was innately evil, the soul was innately good, and that our goal would be to reunite with the light and cast off the evil that was the innate evilness of the flesh, right? So he had a lot of crazy ideas. He thought like plants could talk, and he thought that trees could talk, and he was crazy. If you read, Augustine wrote a whole book about it called Against the Manichaees, and he also wrote about it in his Confessions. I've read the Confessions. I have not read Against the Manichaees, but in the Confessions he talks about his time as a Manichaee. The guy was it was crazy. When he finally met Manny, he realized he was just an idiot, and he left, and he wrote a bunch of books against the Manichaees and how they were just crazy dualists. And okay, so if you start taking parts of the universe and handing them over to like the forces of Satan, then eventually you're going to get to these weird places like the Gnostics and the Manichae were at, right? So there are a lot of Christians who embrace ideas, dualistic theology or philosophy without even really realizing it. Like there's a lot of conservative Christian people who will say like there's something innately evil in beer or wine. Any sort of alcohol is an innately evil object, right? Or they'll say like my flesh is evil, like my instinctive flesh, like I live in a body of death. That's what this says in Romans 7, that like we live in bodies of death. But there's nothing innately evil about the cells and the meat and the blood that comprises our body. That was created by God and was created good, right? There's nothing innately sinful in and of itself, right? Like when Adam and Eve were created, they were created good. Right? They were created without clothes, but there was nothing evil because they had no sin. The sin is the problem, not the actual things, right? There was a book, I can't remember what book I was reading, but it talks about this a lot, that there is nothing innately sinful about anything, right? Like people say like sex is sinful. Sex is not sinful. Our sinful nature pollutes sexual relations, right? And like even he said, I think I'm not sure. I think I was reading this in a Puritan, but I can't remember which Puritan I was reading it in. Wish I could remember. Like even like murder, he said murder is completely evil. The act of murder is evil, but the actual act of murder, when done rightly, is not evil. Like so, if I find a person that had killed 25 kids, and they go to court, and they are judged guilty, and they said the just thing to do using the Bible is to put that man to death. Okay, so when I kill, the person that kills that man is performing justice, not evil, right? So there's nothing innately evil in the act of killing. It's the motive behind the killing that's the problem, right? So there's nothing in and of itself, and no act that you can do that is actually innately evil. What is evil in it is the sin within you and the motive behind the act, right? Sex isn't necessarily sinful. It's the motive behind. It's the sin within. Killing isn't necessarily an evil act. It's why you're doing it. It's the motive. Is it based upon your sin desires? Alcohol. There's nothing innately sinful about the actual substance of wine or beer, right? The same goes for government. There's nothing innately sinful in the act of dominance or authority. There's nothing sinful about the actual act that they're doing. What is sinful about it is they're using the authority, or they're doing it for a sinful motivation, okay? But if you take that same act and do it for a Christly, godly motivation, then that's something good. That's a blessing. Godly government for a godly motivation goes to a godly end, okay? So there's nothing innately sinful about government. There's nothing innately sinful about kingship. There's nothing innately sinful about authority. What happens is we take the wrong God and make that the center of our governments, and then every act that they do has a sinful intent behind it, right? So if you put God, the authority behind your government is your God. And if it's the wrong God, then you're going to get ungodly results. But there's nothing innately sinful about the act of government. What's wrong with it is the motivations of the government, okay? So we got to watch out, because as soon as you start saying Christ is too holy to participate in things so worldly as a government, you're going down the road of Gnosticism and Manichaeism. It's dualism. It's saying that this world is a battle between light and darkness, where the Bible teaches that it's not that. This world was created by God for his glory, right? And even Satan is in God's hand. That is, he's working with Satan and evil to promote his own glory, right? It's not the world biblically, in the biblical worldview of Calvinism. The world isn't a game of chess with God on one side and the devil on the other side, and the God is using white pieces and the devil black pieces. It's God playing himself and letting his left hand beat his right hand. So God is in charge of everything, even the darkness, even the sin, whatever. He knows everything and uses it all for his glory. So watch out. Don't be a dualist. Don't be a Gnostic. Don't be a Manichae. God is king over everything, and don't take anything away from his authority or any realm from his authority. It's all his. Bye. Later.